Hello, everyone, and welcome to the High Noon Hot Seat, brought to you by High Noon Podcast. And I am joined here today by a good friend of mine, the what was your title? Co-founder, CEO, president, monster, just
Overlord.
dude, overlord,
Uh,
senpai of
Senpai.
EGF, Mr. Tyler Schrodt. What's up, buddy?
Hey man, thanks for having me. I feel like I just learned that there was a couple new titles that I could go by.
Yep, yeah,
Uh,
that's
I
one of
don't
the
know what the
things I do.
prevailing theme is anymore, but whatever it is, I'll take it. I'm excited to be here. I'm a longtime fan of the podcast. I listened to it, I don't know, three whole times.
Yes.
So I think you're on like what, episode 100 or something now?
We're on we just recorded episode 86.
It's basically 100.
Yeah, it is. I don't think, I was thinking about it the other day. I don't think there's another Overwatch podcast that has as many episodes as we do. But today is not about me. Okay, it's always about me. Don't worry, guys. Don't worry me. It's always about me. But I did not bring you on the show today to talk about me. We are going to talk about you and about EGF and about EGF having some interesting little workings going on, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. Let's start off specifically about you, and I always like to start off the interviews with you and your gaming origin story. What is your origin story? What is the radioactive spider for gaming that started you off?
It started in a cold, dark winter back in the early 90s when I was 3 years old. That was the first time that my family had a Nintendo.
Mm.
Uh, I didn't even know what it was called at the time because I'm pretty sure at the age of 3 I could not read. Uh, but I really loved Legos, and I knew that my older brother and sister would not play Legos with me, but they loved whatever this video game thing was. And so I started playing Super Mario, which means mostly that I was sitting around hanging out with my older brother and sister as they hogged the controller, as you know they would for the next decade of my life.
You were an early
Uh,
Twitch chat viewer
in
before
early
Twitch
Twitch.
ever existed.
Yeah, see, it's not that hard to imagine, coming back from the 90s that it's so popular to watch other people play video games. But at that point, I loved gaming. I grew up around it. For me, it was how I got to connect with my older brother and sister, who are 10 and 8 years older than I am. So
Mm.
not a lot in common outside of the whole gaming aspect in that area. Um, and so I basically did that forever. And then when I was 10, so around 1999, when Counter-Strike came out, I started playing Counter-Strike 1.6, although it was like beta and 1.3 and like all the fun things that came before that. And I started playing in like online communities and stuff, and that was the first time I was introduced to the idea of esports. Because at the time, sort of in like the first generation of what esports are now, you had the Cyber Amateur Athletes League, CEVO. I think that was a
Mm.
little bit before ESEA came out. Like, kind of all these things that started to allow you to play against other people. Although back at that point, you were playing for like graphics cards and computers and stuff like that.
The old
Not the
days.
$10 million of the TI for first place or otherwise.
Yeah,
So that was when I used to use. Do you remember Ventrilo?
I sure do. There's a
Yeah. So
song about Ventrilo.
oh god.
Let's see.
Well, I used
Oh no,
to.
it's not about Ventrilo. It mentions Ventrilo in the
Okay,
song. It's the
a little
Dota song.
different.
Yeah.
But okay. So at that point, I could use a voice changer because I learned how to do that. And I would run Counter-Strike teams because I was on one for a little while. Played up until I don't know, whatever I guess the equivalent of a tier 2 is. I think it was Cal M at the time. And then realized that I was not as good as my teammates, but I was really good at managing teams. So I got into
Mhm.
that, did tournament organization basically all throughout high school. And then when I decided to go off to college at RIT, I promised my parents that I would stop playing video games so I could go be a physics major and graduate college and go be a responsible, adult of sorts. And then Twitch came out. So there was like this
Wah,
constant
wah,
pulling
wah,
of gaming back
wah.
into it. The worst part about that is I had started watching Justin TV ahead of that, but I didn't really give it
Mhm.
as much credit as was due for it because I would watch really, really old StarCraft streamers,
Mhm.
and I that's when I got into StarCraft 2. And then I lost like 4 years of my life to that game, all the while playing Counter-Strike kind of through the whole thing. So for me, I'd always been kind of drawn to the competitive gaming side of it, had a really soft spot for the indie game side of it. And then really up until my senior year in college when I started running tournaments, and then eventually started EGF off that. I was kind of experimenting with different games. I was an RA in college, so like I went to RIT being like one of the nerdiest schools on the East Coast. So a lot of the programming that we did, a lot of the social things were like LAN parties or whatever. My mom tells me that I should always tell the story about how as I was growing up, I went from playing Mario to playing or thinking that I was playing a computer game with my dad when it was really him playing the game and me just like mashing buttons, making life really hard. And then when I would get into when in high school, she was the only kid that she had ever heard of skipping junior prom to run a LAN party for all of my friends. So you see a lot of like weird, awkward high school me photos, like with really confused people around because I had convinced other people that didn't even know what LAN parties were to come over and hang out while we were gaming. And people were not as excited about that as I thought they would be, except for the people that got there. So like that was good times. So I kind of went through this evolution of like family-friendly gaming to hiding my identity from strangers online so I could profit off of graphics cards and whatever, into running tournaments and stuff for college, and then ultimately doing what I do now.
Nice. That's a pretty good origin story. But speaking of what you do now, we've talked about perfect segue. I'm a master of segues.
Absolutely.
We've talked a little bit about EGF, but why don't you give us obviously a little bit more color to what EGF exactly is?
Yeah. So the premise of the Electronic Gaming Federation at this point is to essentially create the next generation of the NCAA. So if you know what the NCAA is, they're essentially the organizing body for I shouldn't say all of, most of college athletics here in the U.S. And we had started that when I was a junior, senior in college, just running tournaments out of my dorm room for other people that really love gaming as much as I did. Mm-hmm. And over time, we started to evolve that into something that we knew could be an actual business. Because we originally wanted to be a tournament platform, kind of like Battlefy or something like that. But we kind of went down this path of realization that if we wanted to realize our vision, which is to be this giant international governing body for college and high school esports, that we had to start working with administrators. So now we work with clubs, administrators, state and city governments all over the country to help them understand what esports are. Then we run the governance part of it, which is the league and where the NCAA analogy comes in. We do all the media production and broadcast. So we have like production core, which does all the broadcasts for all the matches that we run. And the idea is that we can, in theory, go into any college, any community, anything kind of within what we consider our scope, help them set up a program within a couple months, get them competing in a league that borrows a lot from traditional sports and then allows them to kind of make what they will of it. So most of the programs that we set up, for instance, are partially competitive, but there's also a really strong educational component to it, especially in high school. So that way, if you're a really strong player and you're potentially going to go pro, you've got the standardized competitive evolution that you might in traditional sports from, like high school to college to pro or some other format of that, because esports is cool and special. Or if you prefer to go a different route, like potentially becoming a team manager or going out and becoming a broadcaster, we either work with a college to build a curriculum or we run our own programs, which we do in partnership with procasters all over the place. So in a way, we've sort of realized my childhood dream without even realizing that we were going in that direction for a long period of time. And now we get this really cool opportunity to work in kind of this weird combination of public policy and giant bureaucratic machines and things that are horribly boring to most people, but I think is probably the most fun that I have at my job, other than the fact that I get to play video games as, like a real actual part of it.
So, I mean, basically, it's the type of thing that I know, at least for me, and I'm sure a lot of other listeners would agree, like, I wish that EGF was around when I was in high school and college, like, instead of just like having to be like, esports, is that a thing? Like, no, it's not. Okay, mom.
Yeah, I think we definitely all had that experience one point or another. I mean, like, I remember my parents were always incredibly supportive of everything that I did. They were very
Yeah, same
excited
for
that
reference, mine as well.
I think up until seventh grade, I hated the idea of sports because I had fallen into that like weird emo phase like a
Mm.
little bit earlier than most kids maybe. Loved Good Charlotte, loved that whole thing. Wore the super weird pants, but like no one. I was kept trying to tell people that it wasn't because I wanted to be goth. I just really loved how big the pants were because they were the most comfortable things I could possibly imagine in my life.
Yep. With the
And so I
hooks
had
and the
gone through
chains and
that.
stuff.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And then my parents were like, "All right, you have to do some sort of after school activity." But in my mind, like esports was that activity because
Hmm.
all I wanted to do was Counter Strike. But they were like, no, you have to like go be with real people and do that whole thing. So I tried out for the school's rifle team,
Hmm.
which is like air rifle target practice
Yeah.
stuff.
It's pretty sweet.
Uh, yeah, it's a pretty big deal in my town, which was a very small farm town, and I was not good enough. So I was rejected from the rifle team, but my
Wow.
parents were still like, "You got to try something." And so I looked at the next sign up sheet that was next to it in like the lunch hall thing, and it was wrestling. So I went from rifle team to wrestling, and they don't reject you from wrestling at that age. They're just like, yeah, sure, like anybody come try it out. And I got my ass kicked for like 2 years until I finally started getting into it. But at that point, I was like, I understand what sports mean. I understand how it correlates to what I do in esports. My parents were happy because I would go to the weight room, then go to school, then go to practice, then come home. And they didn't care if I was talking to strangers on the internet and telling them what to do. So that's where I got my love for football, for wrestling. And now it has a lot to do with how we transition the lessons of traditional sports into esports, hopefully doing something that's for the better.
Yeah, and I know myself and other co-host Deathblow come from a world of sports, especially in high school. And I don't know if Death played in college or not, but definitely have been involved in college and in high school as well. And that's really, it provides a very different perspective. People who, not just know what sports are, obviously, but have played sports and done sports at a competitive level. It gives you a different insight to
Yeah.
esports.
Yeah.
But
And I get to see like there's more people like that
yeah.
than I think would have been before. Because I remember thinking back to when I was in high school, you had people that I guess you would call very stereotypical nerds,
Hmm.
and they did not mix at all with the people that played football or
Yep.
did traditional sports most of the time.
Hmm.
But now, when we work with high school kids and college kids and things like that, you find that they're playing video games to like an incredible degree in terms of like their skill, talent,
Hmm.
commitment, whatever. But they're also doing traditional sports. Like we have a lot of kids that will play football in the fall, and then they'll transition to League of Legends or Overwatch or something like that in the
Hmm.
spring. So there's this kind of I don't know. We have a relatively small data set because we're just starting to roll out some different programs, but we've had the opportunity to start collecting more data about who's doing what, and we're starting to see that paradigm shift of people no longer see video games as like that super nerdy, like cliche type thing.
Hmm.
It's now a legitimate like, hey, this is something that has a legitimate path towards professionalism. There's obviously a lot of people that love doing it,
Hmm.
and it's no longer a what's the word? A
Taboo.
taboo.
Yep.
Yeah, taboo.
Ooh,
Yeah.
Jinx. Got that.
Oh my god. So yeah, I'm pretty pumped about that.
Yeah, and I know coming up, or maybe you are. I don't know. It's always tough in past, future, present podcast land to tell exactly when this happened. But you have
Yeah.
a pretty sweet announcement for a new. Is it? It's going to be a league, right? Like or
Yeah.
a season. Do you want to talk a little bit about EGFH?
Yes. So hold on, let me check what the date was, just so we can be more specific.
Yeah.
So on September 27th, we announced our partnership with the state of Connecticut,
Mm.
specifically to launch them as our first member of EGFH. EGFH is our high school league. So if you get confused in the EGF brand world, EGF is the parent brand, which is responsible for everything. Then we have EGFC, which is our collegiate league, and then we have EGFH, which is our high school league. Both of them are interconnected, and the reason that we put them under the same roof was because if you look at traditional sports, there's a lot of disconnect in terms of the ability of a player to gain some sort of recognition or have leverage in one place or another.
Mm-hmm.
So the power imbalance between college and high school was always kind of out of whack. So we decided that if we were getting into these different things, because we had a lot of requests from people to just kind of help them get things started, because what we do in college is ultimately the same thing as what we do with high schools.
Mm-hmm.
So we set it up so there's a clear path for a student to go from high school to college. There's a joint governing board that allows colleges and high schools to work together to make sure that students are protected throughout.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at traditional sports, there's been some issues where like the NCAA will decide that a class that you took in high school isn't actually, it doesn't count. So that can render you ineligible and like a bunch of other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why we kind of set things up that way. So with EGFH, we had run a pilot season in the spring, so spring 2017. We just basically had found a local group that was really excited about eSports. They were already kind of trying to put together community events, but they were sort of lacking in some of the infrastructure and expertise field. Because kind of like most of the people that you find coming into eSports, like they get really excited about it. They know that it's something that should be done. They just don't necessarily know the right way to go about it.
Mm-hmm.
So we had originally come in to just kind of help out, and we ultimately ended up integrating it into what we did with colleges in Connecticut. So we ran this high school season, and then we ran the state championships. I think we had 150 students from 25 school districts competing.
Wow.
And we ran the state championships at the University of Connecticut, and the University of Connecticut gave scholarships to their School of Engineering to the state champs.
That's awesome.
So that was this really awesome precursor of things that like we definitely did not expect to happen or go quite as well or quite as efficiently as we originally thought. Start to transition into something much bigger. And as a result of the success that we had there, we started talking with the state association that handles all of the high school athletics and activities.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll be partnering with them to make sure that we'll be partnering with them to bring eSports to other schools across the state of Connecticut. So they'll be joining our state governance board. They'll be part of our national system, and we'll be working with eventually every high school in the state of Connecticut on building programs, helping them kind of understand how to balance that competitive and educational nature of how esports can be used, competing in our leagues, and ultimately as we add on additional states and cities in the coming months and coming years, national championships and an international championship, which is something that I will hopefully have a lot of really awesome stories to tell in a short amount of time.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely not something we would see with really any sport at all, like a traditional sport, especially at the high school or even college level. It's like, oh, well, you won the national championship. Now we're going to Europe and Asia, and we're going to take them on. That definitely does not happen for traditional sports.
Yeah, it's amazing. We think about if you think about gaming in general, like obviously it's pretty obvious that the games don't have borders, and although you see certainly regional preferences, some countries prefer Dota, some prefer Counter-Strike, some prefer League. It's kind of all over the place from that perspective. But at the core, gaming is sort of like that universal language. So when we thought about where we want to be eventually, we didn't see the need, except for some time constraints, to put limits on how someone can interact with our system. And I mean, you're definitely going to run into differences in terms of academic systems, because not every country has colleges that also have sports teams, and so it's a little bit different. But there's no reason why that can't happen, and why you can't have a Harvard versus Oxford. Like, I think that would be kind of fun, and the coolest part about it is you get to play with these comparisons that you always see in academics or society or whatever, but don't ever play each other in sports for one reason or another. And we can do kind of whatever we want, because you don't have any reason to not do something other than like weird logistics things. But even that's mitigated because you can play online. You can do all sorts of interesting things to eliminate a lot of the barriers that would have stopped that before.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely a much more globally scalable venture for sure. So for there's a good VC type of term for you if people are listening out there. So for EGFH and I guess just the greater EGF brand, what what games are you looking to start with? Is there going to be a set like list of games that you guys are going to have, or is it going to be up to the colleges and high schools, or how's that going to work?
So everything that we do is community focused. So our initial thought being that you obviously need to run games that people are gonna play, because I'm sure that we could probably start a Death Tractor League.
We
Uh,
would be the commissioners of that.
we would be the commissioners, the players, and the only fans probably. So,
True story.
so like we knew that there were some bars that you had to clear in order to be an eligible game. But ultimately, it's up to the schools as to which teams they want to support. And then we specifically work with every high school, college, or otherwise to make sure that they're prepared to onboard that new game. So, for instance, like we'll probably start with League of Legends and Overwatch. That's what we're going to be playing in high school in the spring. That's what we play in college. Just because those games are obviously really popular. There's a lot of people that have it. It's easy to bring an audience in for it, and it's easy to do production around it for the most part. But if those games lose favor, if they don't hold their popularity for the next 100 years, obviously you're going to move on to whatever the next game is, whether it's something like Rocket League or PUBG or something like that. So we designed the system to make sure that it was culturally relevant and able to adapt. The other major difference between what we do in college and what we do in high school is that in high school everything is what we would call an age-appropriate title, just because you see a lot of pushback in video game violence now, and we're certainly sensitive to that fact. So you won't see like a Call of Duty or a PUBG or a Counter-Strike, but you'll see your Overwatch, your League of Legends, and stuff like that. And we split the season into two parts. So you have like your regular EGF, your regularly scheduled program, if you will, with your weekly matches leading up to your championships. But we also run community events. So for games that you can't play online or wouldn't normally play online for one reason or another, like Smash, for instance, we run these local community events where people in your local town, local city, whatever, whether you're a college student or a high school student, can go play these games with other people. And we bring in, FIFA and NBA 2K and Smash and Street Fighter and all these cool games that, again, there's really big communities for, but you can't really do it in an online format, at least not to the way that we would want it to be done. So we kind of have a really broad spectrum of games that we support, but the difference between community is kind of like for that broad population versus competition, which is what we officially sanction as EGF, which is what's chosen by the membership.
Gotcha. So it's more like there's the official, like this is the league titles, like the Overwatch and League of Legends, and then there's the you can do whatever you want because these are games and it's America, and you can have fun playing Minecraft and TF2 random weird German techno party games. Which I think that's all TF2 is nowadays.
Fair enough. There are definitely games that I have no idea how to run tournaments for, just because I have never had anybody ask, but most of them we can figure out. But we kind of looked at it and said there's no reason that we should essentially eliminate the opportunity for someone who wants to be a part of the community to be a part of the community just because of the game that they want to play. So, I mean, generally speaking, I probably wouldn't expect someone who plays League to also be like a huge NBA 2K player. It's certainly possible, but generally speaking, the same way you have your football and your basketball fans, you have your League, your Overwatch, your FGC community, all of these things. FGC community.
Yeah,
just added an extra letters
machine,
and words.
At the ATM machine.
The ATM machine. So the fighting game community, like all those different things, like they're all different segments, and so we wanted to make sure that we have certain games that are sort of the headliners, if you will. The rest of the population is not excluded from that. And the other cool thing about it is if you run those games and you bring a parent into the mix, and a parent may have no idea what's going on in Dota 2. I mean, like, I barely know what's going on in that game, so it's a little hard to introduce the idea to somebody who's of an older generation. They maybe didn't grow up with video games, and they definitely have not experienced like an ESL 1 or an LCS World Championship or whatever. They can come in and say like, okay, this is FIFA. I may not play the game, but I understand what soccer is. I understand this is a video game, and I can see these two people playing against one another, and that in a longer, drawn out sort of educational way allows them to sort of use it as a gateway esport and say, okay, I understand what is going on here, and then you start to like look around and you're like, oh, this is Hearthstone, and oh, they're playing Overwatch, and start to understand different elements of it. So for us, it's as important to the community in terms of as inclusivity as it is about helping to build awareness for kind of those secondary or second degree connections to what we're running.
Gotcha. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. Obviously, like the overarching picture is to like bring esports into the mainstream, and obviously like high school and like high school parents are like as grassroots as you can possibly get in terms of adoption and whatnot. So that's definitely awesome.
They're pretty amazing.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I only remember like what it was like playing, basketball and whatnot, and like just like people get like upset and in a tussy over the dumbest things.
Yeah, well, I mean, I remember. So obviously, there's plenty of stories of this at the pro level, but watching parents start to not only understand that their students playing games, but start to understand the games to the point where they can do that soccer mom or soccer dad thing where they're like, "Are you kidding me? What kind of call was that?" Or like, but doing that in the context
of that
of
goal, I'm like, "Are you kidding? How do you not last
right?
hit?"
Yeah, like if they're using these terms that like in my mind is reserved for someone who has either been in esports for a long time or is generally going to be a younger person. And they're like, "What kind of CSing is that?" And like, "Are you kidding me? Like, you missed that?" And it, like, that's
How
amazing.
How do you get ganked there?
I thought like that type of interaction is a different level of understanding, and different level of connection. Because I mean, the first time that we walked into a room to do this announcement event with Connecticut, you could tell that there were some people that were there to learn for the first time, and they said, "We have students that do this. We really want to support them. We're not really sure what this is." And our job is to help them through that process. But you also had teachers that were probably younger, like just out of college, maybe, or like within the last couple of years. And they're talking about how they were able to take a League of Legends statistics package and use it in like a math class and say like, all right, how do we look at your CS percentage? How do we look at your last hits? How do we look at any of these elements of things? And it had students way more engaged in learning because they're going home and they're playing these games anyway. So now you're bringing it into a classroom and it's just ridiculous. And having that connection between an authority figure or an adult in general compared to a student that's going to expect to like know these types of things was again one of those really awesome things that were kind of an unexpected byproduct. I hope that was going to happen eventually, but I didn't expect it to happen so quickly. And we've just been really fortunate to work with really amazing partners to help make that as approachable and as accessible as possible. Even though in a lot of times we're working with people that, again, just they're very new to esports, but they take that approach that I love to see where they know that they don't understand it and they're not trying to pretend. They go in with their eyes wide open and say, we want to learn, we want to help, we want to make this real. And that's why we're able to partner with the state of Connecticut, and why we'll be working with a bunch of other states coming up over the next year or so, just to make it real and awesome, and hopefully kind of retroactively make those childhood dreams come true to allow people to play these things. So I could not be more excited about the opportunities that we have, and certainly all the things that we have planned coming up.
Yeah, I mean, what an exciting time to be alive. But
right.
So you mentioned all these awesome stories about people like realizing that they can use League of Legends in the lesson plans, and the soccer moms and dads finding out and using the word gank appropriately. Well, have you had any like awkward, like, oh, this guy just does not get it and thinks that I'm a clown, or like just doesn't get what's going on and is like very upset about it, like anything like that?
I would say that everyone has been kind of learning at their own pace. And our job is to kind of help guide people from wherever they land in terms of awareness, acceptance, support, active encouragement, sort of like almost however many stages of grief you're supposed to go to. There's sort of like a spectrum of esports acceptance. I remember when we first started EGF, one of the things that I had done was take and use it as a class project, because I knew that I was going to do this and I was going to figure it out. But it was an easy way for me to like use what I actually wanted to do in a classroom and get away with not having to do all that weird abstract stuff they made you do. So one of the projects that they had us do was customer discovery back in like 2013, I guess it would have been. And so for me, that meant calling like 150-ish college administrators, so like university presidents, dean of students, athletic directors, kind of the whole spectrum of people that maybe would support esports at the time. And at that point, I think probably 70 to 80% of them either said, I don't know what this is and please stop calling me, or this will never happen in my lifetime. But the coolest part of that is you've seen those types of attitudes shift dramatically.
Yeah.
Just because, I mean, you obviously see ESPN covering it, you see it on television, you kind of see it all in all these headlines that you would not have seen previously, because now you're breaking records. It's become more mainstream. There's a lot more opportunities to come across something incidentally. That those attitudes have become significantly more positive across the board. Generally speaking, you're always going to have a group of individuals who look at it in a different frame of view. So we look at it as a perspective of, it doesn't matter whether you think of esports as sports, because the conversation is more about what impact can it have for your students, what sort of abilities does it give them to kind of move through life and pursue something that they really love. And some people have difficulty seeing that, and they get stuck on one particular debate. So you have some people that kind of follow that train of thought, but even they start to soften up when they start to see the reaction that a student has, because one of the anecdotes that we have been given was you start to see students that care a lot about this game, like as much as you care about winning or losing a football game. Like I remember we went in my high school, we went undefeated the entire season. We lost in the semi-final, quarter, I forget what, some finals, like a couple games into the playoffs. And you look around and you see coaches, you see students, you see families all crying, and like, I can't believe this is happening, and it's really emotional. And because of the infrastructure that starts to develop around esports, you start to see those same things. And because you have those opportunities, you start to see people that are looking at it through a different lens and saying, okay, I understand that this is greater than just pixels on a screen. This is again about that experience that we started with back when I was a little kid. It doesn't really matter what the game is necessarily, but it's an opportunity for the students to engage with a bunch of people that love the same thing that they do, in a really meaningful and productive way. It gives them a better opportunity to kind of pursue whatever educational things that they want to. And then in our system specifically, it gives them the opportunity to go from high school to college on a scholarship, get involved potentially with the pro team that we work with, or some other aspect. So you've definitely seen in a very short period of time a lot of public attitudes switch. And as a result of that, my job is certainly a lot easier, but we're starting to see significantly more support, which makes it significantly more meaningful for a student as they kind of try to figure out where their place in life, because I believe we've all had that super awkward high school experience. So hoping to kind of plan out at least something that's kind of consistent has been interesting to see develop.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if there was an esports path from high school for me, I know I certainly would have at least looked into it for sure. Like I almost certainly would have been on an esports club, even if that was even close to a thing. And this is like so much more. It's so much better than that. Like we had board game club, but like no one takes board game clubs seriously. Like unless you have like a really legit chess club, that's not like a thing. But like the basketball, like the high school basketball team is like, okay, you can literally go to a better college because you play basketball, or football, or even like theater or something like that. Like it's more legitimate than just like, oh, this is a club where people do like. It's just a completely different distinction there.
You started to make me think about the clubs that we had that were not sports, and I'm pretty sure the only other one that we had that was good at like competition, maybe I guess is how you describe it, was I think we had a really strong math club.
Yeah.
So like I think we had a chess club, maybe I don't know, but yeah, we kind of I think there was sort of that natural evolution of going from you don't even tell people that you're a gamer at home
Hmm.
or sorry at school because you're worried that they're gonna like beat you up and shove you in a locker or something. I never actually saw that happening, but I'm sure that there is. I don't know.
I
I
could
didn't tell.
never fit in a locker. I was just always too big.
Well, I never even me being on the football and the wrestling team and all that stuff never really advertised that I was also a gamer. And I remember when people would find that out, they were confused. Like different.
Yeah.
It's like,
How
uh,
dare you?
but then you had sort of that shift of like, okay, now everybody kind of started playing games when they were younger, whether
Hmm.
it's Minecraft or otherwise, and they start to evolve, and you start to see these like more integrations of clubs and things where it's aware enough that people don't think it's weird. And then you get to the point where you show up to our Yukon hosted state championship, and we had kids from the football team and the wrestling team showing up just as much as parents and other people that actually
Hmm.
play the game, thinking this is really cool. I wish I was good enough to be on this team. And I was like,
Yeah.
what the hell is happening? Like that's not how that was originally supposed to work.
Yeah. This isn't what the
Um,
1980s movies told me I should think.
it's just been like the craziest thing, and it's almost surreal at different points. I mean, I still have that when I go to any of the pro events and you walk into like a Madison Square Garden or a
Hmm.
Staples Center or the Barclays Center here or anywhere, and I look at it and I'm like, I cannot believe that I'm standing in a room with 10 to 15,000 other people that love this game as much as I do, that are here to support whatever team it's going to be. And like that's still hard for me to wrap my head around
Hmm.
sometimes. And then you throw this stuff at where like all the jocks and people that normally try to beat up play people that play video games saying, I wish I could be like that. And you see that overlap starting to happen, the cultural convergence. It's awesome. I love that that's happening because it to me suggests that there, regardless of what you see in the world outside in terms of its troubles and
Hmm.
tribulations and whatever, there's these little elements of hope where you can say like, if kids can put aside their differences in a world that generally did not like each other at all to be just that much better, maybe there's something awesome that's going to come out of that, and then we just gotta get over the rest of the world.
Yeah. That's an entirely different conversation in of itself. Um, but
One step at a time.
yeah, exactly. First, we'll start with esports, then the world. Um, but the one of the last things I wanted to talk about was, how do you see, maybe EGFH specifically, or maybe just EGF in general, working with like Overwatch League teams, for instance. Obviously, listeners to High Noon podcast completely tuned into Overwatch League and like how that's happening, and we actually
Right.
just had Sinatra and Super, who are two top name players who are actually like literally still in high school right now. They're like
Yeah.
17 years old. They can't play in the first like 4 months of Overwatch League. So, like, do you foresee EGF in some way being almost like the breeding ground for like the next top talent, or is there going to be like a some sort of distinction there between like what you're doing in the high school and college realm and like the pros? Because obviously like with the NCAA they're very like, okay, you can't, like, pro teams can't even like look at a high school or else they get fined and they can't go there. Like there's the whole thing with Rick Pitino and all that stuff with college
Yeah.
students like paying off, like I know I just asked like 15 things in there, but you gotta give a little color to like what you think like the interaction between EGF and like pro teams are going to be.
Well, I hope it's positive. Uh, um, we kind of so going back to my original thesis of how we designed EGF to evolve and grow and sort of become what we refer to again as the next generation of the NCAA
Mhm.
is to look at where it works really well in sports. So like going all the way to the super basic stuff, like having a regular season and playoffs, like
Mhm.
that is fundamental sports and that works really well in esports. It has forever, basically since esports has been a thing. But there are elements that are very different between the two, and there are certainly the way that we look at certain elements about how players are treated, for instance.
Mhm.
And that's the same type of approach that we take to how talent flows through our system.
Mhm.
So our goal is to give everybody an opportunity within our ecosystem and sphere of influence to go through a potential path, or one of several potential paths, I guess I should say, where you might go from high school to college to pro. We've had some players from our college league that have gone on to play for CLG and some other teams. So we've seen that already start to work. But there's also the opportunity for a high school kid to go directly to a pro team. And we actually work with a couple pro teams already to help them understand like how they might eventually be able to integrate more fluently with us, especially as we increase the number of players in our system. And then if you have that, you have to ask the question of, well, if you have a kid that's 17 years old and they go to play for a pro team, and if we assume that nothing changes about the professional scene and careers don't get longer, then they're going to start playing 18, 19. They might retire by the age of 21, 22, 23, maybe if they're lucky. And then what do they do? Do they go into broadcast? Can they find a career in eSports that allows them to transfer their competitive skills into something else? Or more likely, are they going to have to go back to college? And if they go to college, what does that mean for them? Can they play on a team? Do they have to find some other thing? And so what we've started to look at is what rules exist in traditional sports, and if they make sense for esports, and if they do, is there a way to adapt them to make them more fair, understanding that there are going to be situations like that? So the way that we've started to look at it, and what I think we want to go in the direction of, is sort of this realization that when pro players retire, they don't want to play like pro players anymore. Like if you could imagine playing for 10 hours a day for like 5 years, that's a lot of that. Yeah. And certainly there are people that live for that. But ultimately, that's a very grindy, very stressful scenario to be in. And so we had found that a lot of the players that had gone back to college ended up being coaches or working with a team or doing something that kind of like use that experience in a positive way while getting a degree in whatever they were interested in. So there are ways to kind of enable that to all kind of move fluidly. Our primary goal is, as the governing body and as the platform to hopefully elevate some of those students, is that there's sort of, from the pro side, there's an easier way to go and identify people rather than, scour leaderboards and hope that somebody that you have on your team knows a guy that knows a guy or whatever. Right. It makes that a little bit more consistent. I don't think we're ever going to, I shouldn't say never. I don't know if it logistically makes sense based on how seasons work and how rosters change in the current state of esports to do like a formalized draft day. But at least, continuing the current trend of combines and other things that allow that to be showcased properly. And then when it comes to how players move through the system from the player side of it, I expect that you're either going to go from youth esports, whatever that ends up looking like, to high school to college to pro. That's one path. Another path is high school to pro to college. Or I think for the majority of people, just based on statistics, the same way it works in traditional sports, you're going to have the majority of people go from high school to college, and maybe they're going to get a scholarship. But likely that's where their career is going to end, because there just aren't that many teams in the world that you can go join that can support you at a professional level yet. So as you go through that, our primary hope is to make sure that, again, you have those paths sort of laid out for you, that there is some consistency for the professional teams looking in. And the biggest thing is to make sure that the players are protected along that cycle, because while most teams, I think at this point, have sort of been rooted out in terms of bad actors, if you look at a high school student, most of them don't understand what a contract is, let alone whether it's the right kind of contract, or they may not have parents who understand how to do the lawyer part of it or whatever. And so the role that we look at is, how do we make sure that we regulate that flow of talent in a way that protects the students without hindering the system from, developing and being what it is, and hopefully avoiding some of to the best of our ability, avoiding or mitigating any of the risks of major scandals like, the Adidas thing or otherwise. I think some of those questions have to wait until we look at this system as it evolves. But for the time being, we looked at it and said, let's build what we know has to happen. Let's plan for a couple different scenarios that are the most likely things to happen. And then as cases start to go off, the same way any law works, you start to adapt a little bit to address and adapt to those different situations that are coming up. So I hope that that's what happens. I hope that that system works. If there's any like weird thing that goes on, or you see people abusing the system, or it's not working, the reason that we bring in people that are university presidents and educators and players and all stuff and put them all around the table when we make these governance decisions is because we know that we don't have all the answers. But the way that you get those answers is to go out and talk to people that are either actually doing this day to day, that know way more about stuff than I do, or just people that, you know, occasionally have no idea about anything, and you just bring them in and you ask them a simple question. And it's sort of like, I want to say it's called the toddler effect, but I don't think that that's true. I'm pretty sure I made that up. But you ask a toddler a question, and they give you the simplest answer, and sometimes that's just the way to go. So our goal is to be cognizant of the potential information that's out there, allow people to have input on it, and try to make the best decision that we can, but not be afraid to admit that when we screw up, because I think you see a lot of people that kind of go down that path of like, well, I know we made a mistake, but we can't admit this, so like we have to blame it on somebody else or whatever, and that's not the kind of league that we want to run, and it's certainly not the type of ecosystem that we want to generate. So there's a lot of elements to what we want to build there, and so I'm really glad that we've been able to work on a lot of really positive social programming that people have been they have received the efforts that we've done really well so far, and that we're moving in the right direction in terms of how we have to deal with some things that are going to end up being pretty complicated.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine like it's only going to get more complicated, but I'm super excited. I'll let you deal with the logistics, and I'll just reap the benefits of all that. But yeah, that's pretty much all I had in terms of questions from my end. Is there anything else that we missed that you want to showcase or talk about for EGF?
Yes, 100%. I think I love talking about all the nerdy stuff that I can in terms of like governance and bureaucracy and things that I'm sure just riveting to everyone that's listening. But one thing that I do get really excited to talk about is what I just sort of alluded to a little bit in terms of our social impact programs. So one of the things that was always really important to us was looking at how you can use esports as a platform for good. So from day one, we made a couple of choices about the type of community that we wanted to foster and the resources that we wanted to provide to them. And so one of the decisions that we made was that all of our leagues are co-ed. So looking at the opportunity of a female, a male, however you identify, to participate in this league, equal to anybody else, regardless of what preconceived notions someone might have of you. And so far, we've seen some very, very early, very small data points, but we've started to see that working. And a lot of it's just been, creating the right kind of conversation and opportunity, where you see females that are taking leadership positions, which has been awesome. Certainly, it skews heavily male still, but people are starting to realize that, hey, I can do this too, and get involved in that community, and it's been really awesome. And then the second program that we have been really working hard on has been our partnership with a group called Anxiety Gaming. And they work to help people with facing challenges in terms of mental illness and a variety of other things that unfortunately our demographic tends to be a little bit more predisposed to. Most of the people on our team has had experience with mental health issue, with suicide, with all sorts of things that we've seen just hit a little too close to home. And so from day one, we decided that there would be some way for us to contribute to the idea that any student or competitor or member of our community would have access to the resources that are out there, to make sure that you never feel like you're alone, that you're a part of this awesome community, and that you have an opportunity to go out and get help when you need it. I worked for the 6 years that I was in college. I worked in residence life, student conduct, student counseling center, and a variety of other things. So it kind of gave me that unique insight about how isolated people can feel on a campus, and it certainly extends into high school. So we work with Anxiety Gaming to make sure that everybody kind of has an idea of where to go for things. We're really looking forward to running charity streams and helping them grow, because they do an amazing job of helping place people with therapists that are not just another therapist, but someone that's actually the right fit for them, and a bunch of other things. And then making sure that, like, that there's a counselor in your high school or in your college if you have one, as well as, kind of the more traditional routes in terms of like the National Suicide Hotline and a variety of other things. So, so far we've seen really amazing positive responses to all that sort of stuff. Jason Doughton, who runs Anxiety Gaming, has been an amazing partner. And so as we continue to sort of formalize a lot of the leagues, a lot of the rules, a lot of the resources, the programming, all that type of stuff, from those social engagement resources, mental health challenges, governance, and how we deal with talent, how we do education, and how we help people become better broadcasters, and all that, have been awesome to work on. Like, I get a chance to do a little bit of everything every day, and it's one of those things where I wake up in the morning after sleeping for like 2 hours because we were up all night working on whatever the latest like 30-page proposal we have to write for a government is, and I'm just so excited to go to work every single day. So I am super excited to have people like you around, continuing to spread the good word about all the gaming, and certainly very excited to have so many people that are looking at esports in a different perspective, and starting to give it a chance, and certainly embrace what it can be and should be doing for students.
Yeah, I mean, it's just exploded in like just the last couple of years too. Even like since I started really getting into esports, like just from a viewer perspective, like it's exploded. And like anyone who's on LinkedIn, and like when you start to see like most of my LinkedIn feed be about esports, like like the normies are coming, and that means that the muggles are here, and that can only mean good things for esports in general. But
I hope so.
So Tyler, the floor has pretty much been yours the whole time. You obviously could always say whatever you wanted, but now is the chance to either give any sorts of shout outs that you want, or is there any places that people should go for EGF information, or information about any of that good stuff?
Yes, there are. To kind of go down the list, I would like to give a huge thanks to CAIC, who are our partners in Connecticut, helping us roll out this crazy, ridiculous plan of an esports league, starting with them and expanding into other states. Jason Doughton and the team at Anxiety Gaming for all the support they give us on the mental health challenges and resources that we're doing. And for everybody that's been a member of our community, or certainly have said nice things about us on the internet. And even the people that have said bad things about us. I haven't seen a lot of them, but they help us understand some of the things that we should be doing better. If you want to learn more about us, you can either go to egf.tv. You can find me on Twitter at tschrodt, TSCHRODT, or at official EGF. My DMs are open, I think. I'm going to check that after this.
Open them up so we can slide right in.
Oh, yes.
Is there a place, because I know at least there's a non-zero number, and I'm sure there's probably more than I even know about, of High Noon podcast listeners that are either parents or coaches of high school kids. Is there a place that like someone can go to like request information and bring it to the school and like start that relationship? Is there a place or a way to do that?
Yeah. If you go to our website, egf.tv, and you go to the contact form, there's an opportunity for you to identify yourself as a parent or a coach or a school administrator or whatever. Mm-hmm. Send us a note there. And the way that we essentially start up these like community grassroots things is if we find enough people in an area that we are not currently doing something for, we can shift some resources and start to make that happen there. So if you're not in the state of Connecticut, or you're not in one of the next couple of cities and states that we'll be announcing in the coming months, do not worry. We have an option, and we are coming for you. Help is on the way. But regardless of who you happen to be or what position you happen to be in, we're always available to talk about esports, help you explain like what we do, what esports are, what they can do for people. And if there's something that we can do to either help expand EGFH to more students, or EGFC for that matter, or just, have cool chats like this and talk about St. Lucia's Day or otherwise, we can make that happen. So anytime, always available. Twitter, email, contact, whatever. Happy to have those conversations wherever I can.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Tyler, as always, it's been a pleasure talking with you. You have survived a round of the High Noon Hot Seat. It's been a pleasure, and you're always welcome back. And hopefully, we will see each other at some event sometime in the near future.
Yeah, as soon as I get to travel for a little bit more fun and a little bit less business, I'm gonna come back to Buffalo. I'm gonna go out to TwitchCon. I'm gonna go out all of those beautiful places that I want to eventually go back to as a fan. Like,
yeah,
someday that'll happen. Once you pull back that curtain, it's hard to go in the opposite direction.
I'm trying to not go as a fan. I'm trying to go as like press or something. But that's a story for another day. But again, thank you, Tyler, for your time and the info. Like this is something I've been super stoked about for quite some time. Obviously, high school. Sports has just been it was a huge thing in my life. And if I could have compounded that with eSports, I think, I mean, maybe I'd be in the same spot. I don't know. But it definitely would have been.
You would have amounted to nothing.
It would have changed nothing. I'd be right here. No. But again, Tyler, thank you. And again, check out EGF.TV. That's right. And then butcher that. EGF.TV for all that stuff. And if you have any questions about that, reach out to Tyler directly or reach out to me. I have a direct line to Tyler's phone. A big comical phone rings whenever I try to get a hold of him, and he answers instantly. It's like the line directly to the president.
Oh shit! I still have an egg roll.
Come on, we planned this gig. No, we didn't plan this gig. But all right, Tyler, I'm gonna let you go. It's late. Thanks again for being on the show, and we'll definitely have to get some updates sometime when the next time some big Overwatch stuff is going on.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, man. It's been a pleasure as always.
All right, we will see you guys at some time in the future because I still have not figured out how to end these videos. But bye.